I never imagined I'd become a victim of mail theft, especially not at the hands of someone who was supposed to represent the community's interests. But that's exactly what happened when Marlene Stratton, the self-appointed queen of Oakidge Estates, decided that a newly retired postal worker was her next target. I had moved into Oakidge Estates just 6 months earlier looking for peace and a slower pace of life after 35 years. Working in the United States Postal Service, I thought I'd seen just about everything people could do when it came to mail, but nothing prepared me for the quiet tyranny of Marlene. She was in her mid-50s with that unmistakable power haircut sharp bob. Not a strand out of place. Her lips were always pinched like she just tasted something sour, and every time she walked by you could feel the judgment in her eyes like a pressure system rolling through. Marlene was the president of the Homeowners Association, and she wielded that title like a weapon. Our first encounter was just 3 days after I moved in. I placed my trash can out by the curb the night before pick up something I'd done for years at 900p. I heard an aggressive knock at the door. So loud it felt like someone was trying to break in. Standing under the porch light was Marlene wearing a tracksuit that probably cost more than my old car. She held a flashlight in one hand and a clipboard in the other. "Excuse me," she said, flashing a smile so thin it was practically a threat. "But your trash receptacle is in violation of Section 4, Paragraph 3 of the HOA regulations. First offense is a verbal warning, second is a written citation, third is a fine. I suggest you remove it immediately." I apologized and wheeled it back into the garage, though she didn't move from the driveway until she watched me physically close the door. That was the first warning. Over the next few months, I received citations for everything from grass that was A4 and too long to a garden hose visible from the street to a barely discolored piece of siding on my back porch that no one could see, unless they were actively trying to find fault. And of course, Marlene always was just doing my job, she would say with that ever-present smirk someone has to protect our property values. Things escalated when I installed a small bird feeder in my backyard. According to Marlene, that was a breach of the Unauthorized Structures Clause. I pointed out that my neighbor across the street had 3 bird feeders and hadn't received any complaints. "Oh well," she said smugly. "He submitted the appropriate paperwork and received approval from the Architectural Committee, which as luck would have it." She also cheered, "You're being singled out, my next-door neighbor. Tom Delaney told me one evening as Wes stood by our shared fence, she does this to new folks until they either fall in line or leave. The Jensens 2 doors down sold their place at a loss last year just to get away from her. I wasn't about to roll over. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting to formally address the issue that, as it turned out, was the spark that lit the fuse. The meeting was held in the community center next to the pool. About 20 residents showed up, most looking half asleep as Marlene bulldozed through the agenda with robotic efficiency. When the floor opened for community concerns, I raised my hand, stood up, kept my voice calm, and shared my experiences. "It seems the rules are being enforced inconsistently. I've received multiple citations for things that others are clearly not being penalized for. I'm simply asking for equal treatment under the HOA guidelines." Marlene's face darkened several shades from pink to a deep beet red. "Mr. Nolan," she said through gritted teeth, "you may not fully understand how things are done here. The board has discretionary authority when it comes to enforcement. If you have complaints, file them in writing. We'll review them at our convenience." Several heads in the room nodded quietly in agreement with my statement that only made her angrier. After the meeting, she cornered me near the exit. "You've made a serious mistake," she said, her voice low and venomous. "Noon challenges me in my community. Noon." At first, I didn't take the threats seriously. I figured she was just blowing off steam. Then my social security check didn't arrive. I waited a few days, called the SSA. They confirmed the check had been mailed on time. After a week, started to worry. I kept an eye on a mailbox, but noticed something odd. Every morning around the same time, Marlene's silver Lexus SUV would slow roll past the cluster of community mailboxes. One Monday, she was standing there when I approached. "Missing something important?" she asked, smiling. That's when I got suspicious. I used one of my old smartphones and set up a motion-triggered camera hidden inside a small decorative planter facing the mailboxes. Days later, I caught her on video. She had a key one that opened the entire bank of mailboxes. She wasn't just opening hers, she was going through them all. She removed multiple envelopes, including mine, and placed them into her designer handbag. As a former postal worker, I knew exactly what that meant, federal mail theft, but I needed more than one video over the next 2 weeks. I caught her 3 more times on the 4th. She opened my mailbox and slipped out my replacement Social Security check. I'd requested it after reporting to the first one missing. She recognized the government insignia and smiled before pocketing it with this evidence in hand. I contacted the U.S. Postal Inspection Service agent. Malcolm Jenkins showed up the next day, tall, serious, and all business. He watched the videos with increasing alarm. "This is felony mail theft," he said, "and the fact she has a master key makes it worse. Any idea how she got it as HOA president? She probably has access to all common property keys." I explained. Agent Jenkins nodded. "Would you be willing to assist in a sting operation?" "Absolutely," I said. The plan was simple. The Postal Service would deliver a dummy government check to me embedded with a small tracking device. I make it look like I left for the day. Jenkins and his team would watch from an unmarked van near the clubhouse. 2 days later, it was go time. I backed out of my driveway, waved to a neighbor like I always did, then parked around the corner and quietly walked back to the van. Inside, Agent Jenkins and 2 other inspectors monitored the camera feed and tracking signal at precisely 11:15 a.m. So Marlene pulled up to the mailboxes. We watched through binoculars as she unlocked the panel and began rifling through mail. When she reached my box, her eyes lit up. She slipped the decoy into her bag, just as she had before. Agent Jenkins didn't hesitate. 2 federal vehicles pulled in from both ends of the street, blocking her car. Jenkins and his team exited, badges out. Marlene Stratton. Jenkins called, "I'm with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. You're under arrest for federal mail theft." Neighbors began stepping out onto their porches. A few crossed the street, whispering to one another. "You must be kidding," Marlene snapped, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm the HOA president. I was just checking for community compliance. You have the right to remain silent," Jenkins said as one of the other agents cuffed her hands behind her back. "Anything you say can and will be used against you." They search her purse. On the spot inside were not just my decoy letter, but utility bills, birthday cards, and even a check from someone's grandchild. As more residents came out to see what was happening, the vice president of the HOA, Walter Green, stepped forward. "You're dumb, Marlene," he said, shaking his head. "Consider yourself officially removed from the board." Marlene turned to me as they led her to the car, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "This is your fault," she spat. "You'll regret this." But all I felt was relief. At the preliminary hearing, she sat silent, her lawyer doing all the talking. The judge denied bail, citing the repeated nature of her crimes and the federal nature of the charges she faced. 7 counts of mail theft, each carried up to 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. The prosecutor offered her a deal: 3 years minimum, $100,000 in fines, and permanent exclusion from holding any community office again. Marlene broke down in the courtroom, cried, screamed, claimed she couldn't survive in prison. But nobody came to her defense, not the board, not the neighbors she used to control. She'd built her kingdom on control, intimidation, and petty power, and it collapsed in a single morning. I still live in Oakidge Estates. The grass grows a little longer. Now bird feeders are up in more than a few yards, and a mailbox, it's just a mailbox again, but every time I walk by it I smile, because justice, even in a quiet suburban neighborhood, eventually arrives, sometimes wearing a badge.